Welcome to Storytime with Dave Booker. Glad you're here. Today we're going to do our next reading of the Legend of Creation. We're on chapter, what is it, 16? Yeah, 16. We're going to go to chapter 19. And then we're going to start that. The next book I'm going to read, I've got Sheriff in a Small Town 1, Sheriff in a Small Town 2, and I have just finished Sheriff in a Small Town 3. So the next thing we're going to be reading will be from that. Hopefully I can get a copy before that. Otherwise I'll be reading on my tablet. So since we're ready, let's get going. A team captain returns. Let me just turn it real quick. Hold on a second, please. Nothing like a good cup of tea. That's nothing like a good cup of tea. The huge, wide gully was a beautiful and majestic sight, almost a fantasy. Water lazily cascaded over the lip of the ravine, forming a magnificent waterfall, a rainbow hovering in its fine spray. Birds swooped and dived in the evening sun past random trees that clung to the steep, precarious walls, their branches soaking up the last of the day's rays. Many would consider it utopia, but not the foreign object that was falling at a lethal speed. It screamed and clung to its bike, the fast approaching valley floor now crystal clear in its eyes. Clayton's sneer would soon be spread over the floor of the gully like a hot red butter. The team captain shrieked obscenities as he fell fast, but then something caught his eye, something to his left. And that something was now on the collision course with him. Clayton looked down Clayton looked down onto the valley floor, now only 200 meters away, and closed his eyes and cried hard for his mother. But instead of the anticipated sudden painful impact following by the spread, he felt a slight bump and his descent began to slow. The handlebars of his bike slid out from his hand and he was projected forwards. A motor buzzed in his ear. Gingerly, he opened his eyes. Looking around, he discovered he was sitting upright on a yellow wooden model airplane that was being piloted by a very young child. His bike, however, had now reached the valley floor. Clayton watched in horror as it fragmented into thousands of pieces. He screamed as any cyclist would when their pride and joy has been pulverized. Well, cyclists would wish it had happened to them, but not their loved one. But not Clayton. He was not that brave. As the small model plane putted out of the gully, darkness consumed the valley bottom, and Clayton gave his bike its last rites. Time on the ledge is at present. Sorry. Hopefully that helps. Time on the ledge is at present. Wow, that's good. Time on the ledge is at present split into 4 zones: early, middle, late, and night. Clayton was still in the late time zone, but the rest of the teams were well into the night zone. And it was the darkness that Zodiac was thankful for. "You okay?" he whispered down the conduit. The two friends stared at each other and then at Zodiac, confusion spreading through their brains. Zodiac looked down at their puzzled expressions. "It's out cold." "What have you done with his body?" Stan asked, afraid that the answer might be gruesome. Zodiac winked. "He's right here. I swapped clothes with him. I'm going to take his place so as not to arouse suspicion." Murray nodded his approval. "But what are you going to do with him now?" "Ah, that would be your job." Stan's face turned sour, as if his King of the Mountains title had just been smashed on Strava by 10 seconds. "Our job?" "Yes, I need you to drag him into my room and put him in my bed and then administer this." Zodiac pulled out a small vial and dropped it down the conduit into Stan's hands. "What is it?" Stan asked. He swirled the blue liquid around and watched the spinning currents die away. Zodiac sighed. "It's a sleeping potion." "Really?" said Stan, his eyes lighting up. "Does it work? Only I haven't slept in 15 hours. 1 drop and you're out for up to 12 hours. 2 drops and you're out for a day." Zodiac said as he looked around the deck. Stan pulled the vial closer, his eyes growing larger. "Can I have some?" Once our friend is comfortable and in my bed, the rest is yours. But once you must be disciplined with it. Stan looked at the lips at the thought of a full night's sleep. Come on, we better get moving, said Zodiac. Just one more thing, Barry whispered. Why are you doing this? Zodiac smiled a rather smug grin. I received my instructions from a crow a couple of hours ago. Now here's my door key. Instructions for what? Barry asked, catching the key. Intervention, said Zodiac. A flicker of light in the distance caught his attention. Come on, we're out of time. Zodiac slid the near-naked body of the pirate down the conduit and replaced the hatch. Stan and Barry held their breath as the sound of footsteps approached. Footsteps stopped. Small particles of dust fell onto their heads. Hatch complained and groaned under a heavy weight, and voices filtered down to them. The muttering continued for a few seconds and then tailed off as the footsteps moved away. On deck, Zodiac let out a sigh of relief. His disguise had worked. He was now the Night Watch pirate. Relieved, Barry inched the sleeping pirate along the horizontal conduit with Stan pushing. I hope he doesn't wake up, said Stan. Barry nodded, sweat forming on his brow as he struggled on. Better keep that potion handy. This is going to take a while. Stan nodded in agreement. My voice is inside the bunk room. Colin was quizzing Red about his predicament. So you can't remember anything? Colin asked, chewing on a lion bar. Red was still writing a note to himself and didn't look up. I remember you, Paul. Colin thought for a moment. If you crack your head for a second time, maybe your memory might come back. Maybe, but I might forget my plan, Red said as he carried on scribbling. Are you sure you have no urge to howl or crawl around in long grass, said Colin. Red placed his pen on the bed and looked up. Oh, I really have no urge to howl. I honestly have no idea why I would, and crawling around in long grass. He looked around the room at the faces peering intently at him. Listen, I know who I am. I know all of you, but for some strange reason, you all have odd names that I don't recognize. I mean, like Paul here. He's Paul, not Colin. Colin frowned, but Colin is my real name. No, it's not. Your name is Paul, and over there is Adam, Craig, and Mark. My name's Steve. Period. Derek could sense Reg's frustration. Do you want your memory back? He asked softly. I don't know if I do. I really do not care to howl or crawl around in the grass. Why on earth would I want to do those things? Why did I do those things? Derek stared at Reg for a moment. Because they're what make you unique. You're just plain old Reg now. Sorry, I mean Steve. Reg looked thoughtful for a moment. Maybe. Picked up his pen again and carried on making notes. A loud noise from above broke the silence as a half-naked pirate fell through the hole in the ceiling and hung upside down, swinging gently. Bernard reached for his Diablo, loaded it, and aimed with the coolness of a polar bear. Derek, however, fell back up to his bunk. Auston screamed, and Colin found his buttering knife. Reg did not even flicker. He was still scribbling in his pad. Reg, there's a pirate, said Derek in a loud whisper. Reg slapped his notepad shut and placed it under his pillow. He turned to the dealing pirate and then to Derek. Adam, what have we just been talking about? Derek looked confused. Names. My bloody name is Steve. If my mother christened me Reginald, I would have left home and paid for a new identity. Derek blinked and nodded towards the pirate. Reg followed his gaze. It's a sleeping pirate. Most likely he's been knocked out. I presume it's something to do with this, with Jonathan and Alan. Muttering filtered down from the hole in the ceiling. Can you help us get him down? Barry said from behind the pirate's rear end. Derek stood up and Bernard disarmed his Diablo. They reached up into the hole and pulled the pirate down, laying him on the floor. Stan dropped the rope through the hole and it landed with a thud and coiled up on top of the stricken pirate. He followed the rope out of the hole, hotly pursued by a sweaty Barry who replaced the loose panel. It's too bloody hot in there, said Barry, wiping his beads of moisture from his brow. It would appear so, Jonathan, said Reg, handing him and stand a towel each. Derek poked the pirate with his foot. So was the pirate a free gift with the rope? Barry wiped his brow for a second time. He came compliments of Zodiac. Really? Why do we need a half-naked, unconscious pirate? Said Reg, looking up at Stan, who was back on the beams doing pull-ups. No, we don't. Zodiac knocked him out and ordered us to put him in his room, Barry replied. Well, where's Zodiac now? He's disguised as a pirate on the deck. Zodiac gave us his room key and a weird sleeping potion. Stan reached into his pocket and pulled out the vial. Catch! Reg caught it and swirled it around, examining the blue liquid. Curious. I think we better hurry, said Barry. He might wake up. Reg turned towards the door, then it stopped. How do you suppose we open our door? Did Zodiac give you instructions on how we unlock the padlock on the other side of the door? Barry and Stan looked at each other. I never thought of that, muttered Barry. Said Stan. I'll have to stay here then, Reg said. Where? Said Barry, looking around at the occupied monks. Reg looked around at his teammates. Any volunteers? Teammates looked at one another in awkward silence. Can't we just, leave him on the floor? Said Auston. Look, we could push him under Colin's bunk. Reg looked at the gap between Colin's bunk and the floor. Well, under the bunk he goes then, said Reg, taking control of the situation. Derek watched in silence, happy to let Reg take control. He was more astonished and intrigued than bothered about who was in charge at the moment. But sooner or later, he wanted his command back. How much of this potion do we give the pirate? A drop, or was it 2, said Stan from above. Okay, we'll give it 2 drops to be safe. Team Cogs and Clock collectively held their breath as Reg unscrewed the small cap and squeezed the rubber tip, drawing on the blue liquid into the pipette. Holding the tip over the lips of the sleeping pirate, he squeezed 2 blue-tinted droplets onto the pirate's lips. The pirate's eyes sprang open, and he wasn't happy. The yellow wooden plane zipped along the valley floor, gaining height, and shot through a gap between the smooth rock faces, embracing the open sea shimmering below in the moonlight. The little pilot mashed the throttle, and the plane climbed to around 400 meters above the sea and leveled out. Clayton Sneer clung onto the bodywork with both hands, wincing as a splitter dug into his palm. He had never really appreciated anything in his life, and now he was appreciating being alive. As a yellow flying contraption with its single propeller engine soared above the waves, Clayton looked back, scanning the coastline they had just crossed. He could just make out faint glimpses of light, possibly firelight. He shivered. The air temperature had dropped sharply, and a crisp breeze was blowing into his angry face. Clayton looked up at his juvenile pilot. Oi! He cried, his lip curling into a sneer. You there! Where are we going? The young pilot ignored the question and continued flying his aircraft. They had been airborne for hours, and the pilot that ignored him throughout the entire journey. Clayton clenched his fist and slammed them down on the wooden fuselage. It didn't help that his bottom had gone numb. He shuffled awkwardly in his seat, but the fear of falling off was overwhelming. His teeth chattered 10 to the dozen in the icy. He looked up and glared at his captor. I asked you a question, he screamed, frothing at the mouth. The pilot slowly turned his head and looked at Clayton. Clayton gasped in horror. The remains of a jam sandwich clung to the corner of his mouth of this very young pilot, and a small gob of the sticky red stuff was hanging from the tip of his nose. Nearly there, mister, replied the young pilot in his squealing, unbroken voice. It sounded like a train wheels binding on the rails going round a tight curve. Turning back towards the first strands of light on the horizon, they had been flying all night. Before Clayton could react, the young pilot nosedived the plane towards the sea, leveled out at around 50 meters above the waves, pulled the throttle back, and spun the plane upside down. Clayton fell like a lead balloon. Come on, mister, and you're very welcome. Clayton plummeted in the dawn sky, screaming like a hyena. Sorry. On board, the gutless splinter Moore's hammer forced his huge frame through the narrow corridor and knocked on Buckswad's door, the wooden panels buckling under the onslaught. "Come in, Morris," said Bucks, rolling his eyes, well aware of who had almost smashed his door down. "Report!" Morris cleared his throat and straightened his tight suit. "My plan seems to be working." Buckswad sat down in a chair next to a wood-burning stove and picked up a tiny scroll of paper that had just arrived with a crow. "Well, Mother Nature is not happy. She knows something is wrong, and we don't have much time." Morris screwed up his face. "I thought Mother Nature never intervened in ledge affairs." "Yeah, she doesn't, but that doesn't mean she can't bend her own rules from time to time, does it?" Morris frowned and scratched his head. Bucks said, "She has friends who can help." "Like who?" Bucks tossed the paper on the table. Morris was a handy enforcer, but his brain really lacked what his bulk had to offer. "I'm guessing Zodiac and Starlit." "What'd she tell you this?" said Morris, unaware he was now really annoying Bucks. "It's a warning. She's warning me that she knows. Your plan may well turn out to be a disaster I originally predicted," said Bucks, slamming his hand down on the table. Morris fell silent for a moment, and tiny wisps of smoke appeared from his ears. "So what do we do?" "We play along and hope we can make this look like it's not cheating. Justice states that we'll be receiving a package very soon." Buck sighed. "I don't know, but keep an eye out for anything unusual." Morris nodded and turned to leave. "And where do you think you're going?" said Bucks. "A cookery class," said the hulking frame of Morris, squeezed through the doorway and disappeared into the corridor. Bucks Wild sat in silence for a moment, anger filling his eyes. Leaping out of his chair, he screwed up the message and threw it into the stove. "I'll win the next stage," he muttered, "if it's the last thing I do." "Grab his legs!" Colin dived onto the pirate's legs as Auston and Derek grabbed an arm apiece, pinning the crazed sea dog to the floor. Bernard fired off a ball bearing, hitting the pirate sweetly on the head, momentarily stunning their raging guest. "What's going on?" said Reg, trying to keep the noise down. "I thought this was a sleeping potion, not very strong, mad pirate potion." Sam looked down from the rafters. "Zodiac said it was. Maybe it just takes time." "Woo-hoo!" he said, and landed on the pirate's chest, keeping him down. Reg took a closer look at the bottle and found some small writing in the bottom of the label. He squinted his eyes. "Warning, may cause a sudden episode of rage and anger." Derek grunted, the pirate's arms flailing around as his grip tightened. "Say how long this will last?" "No." "I know," said Barry, pushing past Derek. He sat down on the pirate's head and farted. "That should knock him out." The scurvy sailor's arms went limp, and teams Cogs and Clocks looked at each other. Seconds later, they started to twitch. Okay, maybe it won't." The pirate took a deep breath in and raised his arms off the floor, defying the vice-like grasp of Derek and Auston. Bernard fired off another ball bearing, but the pirate flicked his head to one side and dodged the incoming projectile. Trembling as fury filled his body, the pirate threw up his arms, tossing Derek, who was smiling as he had just thought of a joke, and Auston across the room, knocking Barry into a wooden bulkhead. Reaching for Stan, he grabbed him by his chest and tossed him over his head. Colin, who was still holding the pirate's legs down, looked at his teammates lying in crumpled heaps. The pirate smiled at him, kicked him up with ease, and pulled himself to his feet as Colin smashed into the beams above, his buttering knife embedding itself in Reg's bunk post with an amusing boing sound. Bernard fired off two more ball bearings, hitting their now raging guest on the head and momentarily stunning him again. Seizing the opportunity, the powerhouse bounced, hitting the pirate hard in his chest and knocking him backwards against the tiny black back wall. But, like a wrestler, the pirate rebounded off the wall and plowed straight back into Bernard, knocking him to the ground. The pirate's eyes glowed a fiery red. I'm going to kill you all," he growled, grabbing Bernard by the throat. Dan picked up a chair and smashed it over the pirate's head as Reg lunged towards him with a kick. Harry went in with a punch, and the pirate's vice-like grip tightened around Bernard's throat. Bernard's eyes bulged, and his face turned red in desperation. The team rained down on the pirate's head and hands with whatever they could find. Alan dropped from the beams and kicked him squarely in the jaw, but the pirate barely flinched, his hands tightening around Bernard's neck as Bernard started to turn blue. The desperate, hold on. The desperate teammates clawed at the clamp-like hands around their comrade's neck. With only seconds to spare, the pirate's hands went limp, and he fell to the floor on top of Bernard, who coughed and spluttered as Reg pushed the pirate off him and rolled him away. Auston guided Bernard towards his bunk. I think the Vulcan finally decided to act in accordance with what it was designed to do. Spoke to the pirate, who was snoring loudly. You okay, Bernard? Oh, I'll be fine, said Bernard in a hoarse whisper as he lay down. Derek shuddered as he watched Bernard nursing his red neck, the imprints of the pirate's fingers clearly visible. He was lucky the potion had kicked in when it did. The financially invested captain looked around at the shocked faces of his teammates. After what they had just gone through, fighting a drug-stimulated mad pirate, there was really only one thing he could do. What do you call a pirate on drugs? The shocked faces of the team turned to their leader. Ha! For several seconds, the blank faces stared back at him before they all burst into roaring laughter. Not at the joke, but at the situation. Only Derek could have timed the one-liner to perfection, and only Derek could have got away with it. Once the adrenaline had died down, Derek turned to Reg. Time for stage 2 of your plan, Reg. Steve. Yes, Adam, I do believe that the time is right, said Reg, grabbing the hammer and nails. Alan, please, can you get some of that rope and follow me? You'll only need around, 2 8-meter lengths. Jonathan, please, can you nurse Mark back to full strength? We'll need him soon. Mary stared at Reg and then at Bernard. I need the toilet, and besides, I'm not a nurse. My dear Jonathan, I'm sure you can control your bodily functions for the moment, and from what I've heard, you do like to wear the odd nurse's outfit behind closed doors. Mary turned a shade red of purple as Reg clambered into the hole in the ceiling, with Stan trailing behind with a rope. Good luck, Derek said as they disappeared out of view and replaced the loose panel. Mother Nature was very particular about which direction the morning sun clambered over the horizon, and more importantly, where it was positioned at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. During the early days of the ledge, the blazing ball of life shone its rays on the front garden of Mother Nature's cottage during the afternoon. Thus, when she was having a cup of tea in her back garden with Frankel, she was never able to enjoy a warm setting sun. After 100 years of moaning about it, the mother of the ledge decided that if she spun the ledge on its axis a full 180 degrees, she would be able to enjoy her early evening tea while watching the red sphere out of fire as it disappeared on the edge of the ledge. Frankel somewhat disapproved of her actions and did wonder why she couldn't have just moved to the front garden. And now the same sun was up, not showered, not dressed, but partway through its daily cycle nonetheless. Its rays beating down on the Sea of Biscuits as the LS Splinter cut through calm waters, heading towards Mother's Landing, now only 3 days away. At the stern, enjoying a fresh cup of coffee, Buck Swad reflected on life as the glow of the sun warmed his face. The sun filled him with a degree of jubilation that he would never admit to anyone, and even though he had seen it thousands of times before, he never got bored of it, of the spectacular sight. Turning away from the sun, he looked down the small table next to him, where 2 crows with messages attached to their long black legs flitted about in a cage. As he unfastened the little door, the crows squawked and hopped around for a little while, then flew off into the distance. Bucks watched them until they were no more than little black dots, finally disappearing out of sight. Lifting his cup, he finished the last remaining dregs of his coffee and placed the empty cup back on the small table. A frown passed over the Administrator General's face, disappearing as quickly as it arrived. He hadn't given a single second thought as to how Clayton Sneer was doing. He then remembered he didn't care, although he did wonder what had become of the little idiot. A strange screaming filled his ears, breaking his reverie. Turning towards the noise, Buck squinted out to see where he could just make out a figure falling from the sky about 300 meters from the stern of the ship. A very familiar figure. Clayton! Clayton Sneer entered the cold water of the sea with the grace of a brick, plunging to around 10 meters in depth before coming to a stop and swimming back up to the surface. He coughed and spluttered, spitting out a mouthful of salty water as his angry face broke the liquid barrier. Gasping for air and thrashing around like a fish on land, he spotted the eldest Splinter and waved frantically. Oi! Over here! Help! A voice from behind him stopped him in his tracks. So, you finally escaped the dwellers. Clayton spun around in the water. Sitting on the world's smallest wooden boat, which was listing badly, was a whole huge bulk of Moore's hammer, his entire lower frame filling the tiny space. Well, yes, obviously. That may explain why I'm here, said Clayton, trying to puff out his chest while still treading water. Morris ignored the sarcasm, and his face remained static, mainly because he had few facial expressions. He stared at the helpless figure. Help me, Clayton demanded. Well, is there any reason why I should? Said Morris, his voice reverberating through the water. Yes, I might drown. Morris smiled. I wouldn't lose any sleep if you did. Clayton exploded with rage. After everything he had been through, he had had enough. You big stupid ape! Did you row that boat out here just to mock me? Morris raised an eyebrow and smirked as Clayton slapped the water. No, I just wanted to watch you suffer. His lips curled and glared menacingly, his steely stare almost pushing Clayton under the water. Call me big stupid ape again, and I'll crush you with one hand. Clayton gulped. He looked out across the waves that stretched to the horizon and back at the giant henchman sitting in the safety of the little boat. Look, Clayton said, his tone softening, I'm freezing here. Would you please allow me onto your boat? Nope, it's not big enough, came the rumbling reply. But I'm going to drown. As I said earlier, I'll lose any sleep over it. Clayton's eyes widened and his breathing quickened. He was tiring and slipping under the waves. However, Morris added with a smile, appearing to relish Clayton's fear, Administrator General Buckswad wants you alive. There was a long, dramatic pause. Well, for now, anyways. Clayton smiled a wan smile and looked up at Morris with big eyes. So, can I get in your boat then? Morris stared back at Clayton. You really don't listen, do you? There's no room. Clayton gritted his teeth. So how exactly are you going to rescue me? Morris smiled his toothless grin, reached behind, and pulled out a long piece of rope. Attaching one end to a cleat on the little boat, he threw the other end into the sea. Hold on to this. The rope hit the water with a slap. Clayton reached out and grabbed hold of the end, not at all happy with the way things were progressing. He was about to protest when a sudden surge in forward momentum almost pulled his arms from their sockets, knocking the wind out of his complaining sail. Wait, hold on 1 second, sorry. Oh. Waves of salty water splashed into his mouth, choking him as Morris's huge arms, holding an oar apiece, swung into rowing motion. Pumping like a locomotive, his hands blurred, and the little boat was propelled across the water at a speed it was clearly not designed to do. Clayton swung from one side to the other behind the boat like a rag doll as he bounced across the waves. Catching sight of the yellow splinter through salty, bloodshot eyes, his heart leapt with joy. His ride was almost over. Morris turned the little boat hard to starboard and stopped. Clayton, however, didn't. Maintaining the same momentum, he smashed headfirst into the hull of the galleons, cracking a cycling helmet. Looking up, Clayton saw two sets of outstretched arms coming towards him. The deckhands pulled him up and tossed him onto the middeck. He groaned and shook his head. Coming to after a couple of minutes, he sat up, took off his helmet, and examined it, shaking his head. The deckhands hauled the little boat out of the water and were securing it on the middle deck when the huge stream of Morris appeared. "Look what you did to my helmet," Clayton moaned. He looked like a poor man's cyclist, dripping wet, ripped clothes, and a cracked helmet. Morris shrugged and turned, the boards under his feet protesting under the weight of his bulk. "Follow me," he said, and headed into the superstructure of the ship, the wooden steps groaning as they descended into the bowels of the ship. "Where are we going?" "Oh, don't you want to see your teammates?" Clayton's head exploded in a fit of rage. "Those tosspots, they bloody left me in that tunnel." Morris grunted and opened a door that led into a short, narrow corridor. At another door, he pushed it open and shunted Clayton inside. Once his eyes had adjusted to the low light, Clayton saw he was in the mess room. The men who were lounging around, drinking, eating, and generally having a good time were, in fact, his teammates. They were dressed in casual clothes and looked relaxed and happy. He, on the other hand, was standing by the door, dripping wet in a tatty cycling gear and holding a cracked helmet in his hand. Steam began to escape from his ears as he slowly turned red and started to shake. Anticipating what was about to go down, Morris pulled up a ringside chair and settled down with a smile. "Could you pass me that hammer, please, Ellen?" Stan looked around, wondering who Reg was talking to. "Ellen, hammer, please." Seeing no one else in the tiny space, Stan picked up the hammer and passed it to Reg. Squeezed inside the narrow conduit, the two men watched as the tillers turned to the ship's position. Reg took a nail and hammered it deep into the thick, strong wood. He repeated the procedure on the opposite side of the post and knotted one end of the rope to 8-meter ropes to each nail and spread the rope out along the floor of the conduit. Stan, who had shuffled further back, watched with a confused look. "And how is this going to help us?" "Ellen, trust me," Reg said and winked, which Stan found rather uncomfortable in the confines of the small conduit, so he crawled back to their room. Reg followed closely behind. "I was marked," Reg said as he dropped out of the hole in the ceiling. Derek met him as he fell to the floor. "He's having a kip, but I think he's going to be okay." "Good. We need to put our operation into motion very soon." Derek pursed his lips and sighed. "Come on, out with it, Adam." Derek took a deep breath. "Me and Auston have been talking, and we were wondering how exactly you plan to fool the helmsman that we are going in a different direction." "You mean Craig?" "What? You called Craig Auston for some strange reason," said Reg. Derek scratched his head. "Did I?" "Yes." "Oh, well, okay." Reg smiled and put a hand on Derek's shoulder. "But don't worry, I've already thought about that." And he turned towards Auston and smiled a wolfish grin. Auston suddenly felt uneasy. "Craig, I noticed a few days ago that you put some objects away in your drawers," said Reg, pointing at a small chest of drawers in the corner. "And," said Auston, "I do believe one of those objects was your bike computer." "Yeah, it was," Auston said, looking a tad worried that he may have put other private items in that drawer that he thought would be safe from prying eyes. Reg continued, "And for reasons only known to yourself, you removed the magnet that your sensor picks up from your wheel." Astonished that anyone had noticed, Auston nodded his head. Reg held out his hand. "I will need that magnet." Auston, dumbfounded, opened the drawer, reached inside furtively, and removed a small wheel magnet. Derek was impressed, but still had an enabling doubt. "I assume you're going to use the magnet to fool the compass next to the helmsman." Reg winked and nodded as Derek continued. "Is the magnet strong enough?" Reg smiled his wolfish grin for a second time. "Adam, please turn around." "Why?" said Derek. "Please." Derek turned around and Reg rubbed the magnet up and down his back. earth are you doing? Said Derek. Here we go, said Barry, charging the matter with Derek's magnetic personality. It wasn't meant to be a joke, but with the adrenaline running high, everyone except Reg burst out laughing. Nice one, Reg, Sam said through a flurry of girly giggles. The name is Steve, Reg replied in a deadpan voice, and I was not making a joke. Derek glared at his teams to stem the laughter. So how are you going to get the magnet anywhere near the compass? Team Cogs and Clocks quietened down, and all eyes turned to Red, who severed Stan, who was back swinging on a beam. Red stared into the hopeful eyes of his teammates. Have faith. We have faith. Bloody hell, Reg, or Steve. I mean, give us a clue, Auston said as the others nodded in agreement. Reg paused, mainly for dramatic effect, and then replied calmly, who is up on the top desk in disguise? Unlike a fruit machine dropping its jackpot, a waterfall of pennies finally dropped, followed by a late tinkle from someone who was a couple of seconds behind. Zodiac, cried Barry. Exactly, Reg replied. Derek was mystified. Before Reg had been hit on the head, his sole contribution to most of the team's discussions had been a long howl, followed by many random comments. Now, here he was with a near-perfect plan to save their race. Derek smiled and wondered if they could keep this new version of Reg, without the daft names, of course. And then he considered the name Adam, quickly rejecting it like it was the first solid meal. Adam, he muttered to himself. A voice from above crashed into his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. So, what's with the ropes nailed to the rudder's post? Dan said. That, my dear Stanley, is how we take over the mill. How? We have marks, said Reg. And when exactly do we put this plan into action? Derek asked. Reg looked around at his teammates and smiled. We go live tonight. On board the LS Splinter, the afternoon entertainment was in full swing, and Morris Hammer was enjoying the show. No more tea. His huge forehead wrinkled as he searched to find the appropriate words to describe the performance in front of him, finally concluding, "It's good." On board the spectacle he was witnessing was an outstanding production of action, drama, and emotion. The lead character, Clayton Sneer, was a perfect antagonist, tossing the chairs and swearing heavily at his co-stars. The emotion-filled act was one of pure brilliance, Clayton's dirty, rich cycling attire matching perfectly his ranting, sniveling character. Surely, Morris thought, worthy of an Oscar for Best Costume. Morris especially enjoyed a crucial scene that involved Wilson Ware-a-Lot rising to oppose Clayton, only for the frothing madman to launch a table at him. The central character was stealing the production. No matter how hard his co-stars tried to raise their game, this was a one-man show. By the end of the performance, the lead had put so much effort into his role that his voice had become croaky. In the final scene, a member of the audience was invited to participate. Morris, being the only attendee, volunteered to rescue Daniel Drift from Clayton, who was holding the edge of a table against his throat, cutting off vital oxygen. A giant hand grabbed Clayton around his throat and lifted him off the ground. Daniel Drift coughed and spluttered when the pressure of the table was relieved. And as the curtain fell, Clayton Sneer was hauled off the stage and thrown straight into a cell to await his sentence and the critics' reviews. Let's see how much further we got. About 4 more pages, so we're almost at the end of this chapter. Under a little wooden shelter in front of the poop deck on the LS Potato Pie, trainee helmsman and pirate Unavan Steelit was happily steering the ship, keeping an eye on the navigational compass and making any necessary adjustments as the sun made its merry way up into a crisp blue sky. A crow appeared and flapped around the deck for a couple of seconds, landing on a perch next to the ship's wheel. Univan untied a message from under its flag, read it, and rang a bell. Moments later, Captain Tinfoil appeared with Dario perched on his shoulder. The angry-looking duck gave Univan a disapproving quack. This better be good, the captain growled. Univan handed the note to Captain Tinfoil, who shivered as he read the message from Buck's Wad, all expression draining from his face as he realized his time was up. And as he walked out from under the shelter, Dario pecked at Univan's head very hard. Univan sighed and rubbed his sore head. He wondered why he had signed up for a life as a sea pirate. His mother hadn't been keen. She had wanted to join the land pirates in the sands of the forgotten, but he had a curiosity and a love for the ocean that she couldn't quash. For the next 12 hours, Univan watched the sun as it arced across the sky and sank over the opposite side of the ship. Surely his pirate contract entitled him to some form of meal break, he thought. The last strands of light evaporated and a veil of darkness drifted down on the yellow potato pie. Waiting at the top of the tight vertical conduit, Reg listened for any sounds. He could only hope that Zodiac was still on the deck, disguised as a pirate. Land depended on it. After a couple of minutes, he inched the panel up and scanned the deck. At the far side of the wooden deck, a figure was slumped across the barrel. Reg watched it intently to see if it moved. Once satisfied the coast was clear, the non-howling entity crawled out of the small hatch, replaced it, and slipped behind some crates. He peeped out and observed the prone figure whose head was not enveloped in a large hat. He had no idea if it was Zodiac or not. After waiting several more minutes and hoped that the pirate would shuffle around and reveal his or even her face, Reg took a deep breath, lowered himself onto the rough wooden deck, and slithered out from the stacked crates. As his head poked around the bottom of the wooden boxes, he froze in fear when a hand latched onto his left ankle. Shh! Reg turned around, terror filling his soul at the thought of being caught. His heart was beating like a teenage lad who had just seen his girlfriend's underwear. He looked up at the shadowy figure holding his legs, his eyes settling on the oversized hat. The pirate pulled him back behind the crates, let go of his leg, and slowly pushed up his hat. Reg almost collapsed with relief. Zodiac, he whispered. Zodiac nodded, scanning the area. You're here, then who's that over there? Said Reg, pointing at the slumped pirate. My cover will not last much longer. I had to knock him out, and he was asking too many awkward questions. Sooner or later, somebody is going to realize that there is a missing pirate, and an unconscious one. Reg sat up and reached into his pocket. Do not worry, my plan is almost ready. I need you to do one last thing for us, and then you can slip back in your room. Zodiac raised his eyebrow and stared at Reg. Gone was the howling and the random comments, now replaced by this reasonably intelligent man in front of him who was planning to save their race. He had been mesmerized by Reg when he was more than a little odd. Now he was in complete awe of his clever thinking. He continued to stare at Reg, open mouthed, shaking his head in an effort to bring himself back to the present. He looked down at the small magnet in Reg's hand. What's that for? Reg smiled. It's a charged magnet. Hopefully it will fool the ship's compass. I need you to gain entrance to the helmsman's shelter and place this magnet under the compass at a specific point to alter the reading. Right, said Zodiac, his eyes fixed on the new incarnation of Reg before him. Well then, hold on, sorry. We'll then manipulate the rudder post using Bernard's strength and Auston's GPS. So to conclude, says Zodiac, the magnet will alter the compass, and the helmsman will still think we are on course for Yellowstain port, when really we are heading to Mother's Landing. Red nodded. Yep, that's correct, Zodiac. Zodiac fell silent and smiled. In a million years, and he almost qualified, Was there ever an oddball quite like Reg? Reg, he whispered, that's brilliant. Just brilliant. Reg frowned. Thank you, but for the love of a good kebab, my name is Steve. No, sorry. I'm not Gimli, moaned Bernard, who was sitting on the tight conduit just above the tiller with a rope slung over each of his broad shoulders. Who? Said Barry. Gimli, the strong dwarf from Lord of the Rings. Barry, uncultured in the world of films, screwed up his face as he tried to think who he was. Never heard of him. Bernard sighed and shuffled into a more comfortable position. Barry was supposed to be helping, but he just farted. You'll be fine, Barry assured him and patted him on the shoulder. He then farted again and left to find Auston, who was to provide navigational instructions. With Bernard and Auston in position, Reg dropped out of the hole and fell to the floor, passing Stan, who was still hanging about in the rafters. Derek appeared by his side. Colin has jammed the door just in case someone checks up on us. Reg nodded. You mean Paul? Yeah, Paul. Once he received a signal from once we receive a signal from Zodiac, we'll be ready to go. Derek nodded and watched as Rex sat down on his bunk and waited. Only a few days earlier, Reg had been howling at people and asking random questions. Even though he quite liked this new, relatively intelligent Reg, he was starting to miss the original howling crazy Reg. And more importantly, he wanted his command back. Now he was wearing thin. Under the cover of darkness, Zodiac crept towards the helmsman's shelter, tiptoed to the side of it, and lay down on the deck. Pulling a long tarpaulin over him, he lay motionless, listening and waiting for his moment to make a move. He could hear Univan Steelett at his usual post steering the ship, but there was an added complication. Zodiac could hear the tones of Captain Tinfoil. Keep her steady, lad. Aye, aye, Captain. Univan was a little uneasy. Captain Tinfoil never came up to the bridge on the night shift. Something was wrong, and clearly the captain was taking no chances. Tinfoil looked out across the darkness of the ship and tilted his head. The gentle lapping of waves against the side of the ship filled the night air. Satisfied that all was well, he turned to the little hob in the corner of the bridge and made himself a cup of hot coffee. Seeing Captain Tinfoil's back was turned, Zodiac slithered out from under his shelter, grabbed Univan, and clasped his hand over his mouth. Turn around, close your eyes, and don't utter a single word or I'll cut your throat, hissed Zodiac. The training pirate gulped and started shaking as he turned away. Zodiac reached under the compass, detached the magnet, and checked the needle was showing a false reading. All he had to do now was inform Reg that the magnet was in place, and when Auston had them on the right course, the compass should show them on still heading for Yellowstain port. Reg, if this works, you're a genius, thought Zodiac. He turned to Univan. I was never here, he whispered in his ear and slipped back into the darkness. Captain Tinfoil, nursing a steaming hot cup of coffee, turned back around to the helm and a shell-shocked Univan. A shiver ran down his spine for a second. He had a strange feeling of another's presence. Are you all right, me, Artie? He surveyed the area while Dario slept on his shoulder. Aye, Captain, said Univan, who had turned a whiter shade of pale, the thread from Zodiac still bouncing round inside his head. Captain Tinfoil sat down on a box and slurped his coffee. His mind was on fire. There was something bothering him, and he just couldn't fathom what it was. All right, next is chapter 17, Turning the Tide. So that's going to be kind of a short one. And then cleared for takeoff. So that is it for today. I really appreciate fun read. I love this book. I really do. And that's it for today. I apologize for my voice cracking. I'll have to add something to my tea next time. Honey, whiskey, something else, Anyways, that's it for today. I look forward to seeing you again. What day is today? Today is Tuesday, so we'll be doing this again on Friday, which will be chapter 17. So I look forward to seeing you. Hopefully my throat is better by then, and we'll have a nice, clear, straight reading. So thank you again for visiting. Be good to yourselves. Bye.